Something is starting to line up for the Detroit Lions, and if you really look closely at how this front office operates, you can't ignore the pattern that's quietly forming right now. With the draft approaching and 9 total picks available, the conversation isn't just about adding talent, it's about what those additions could mean for players already on this roster, especially Sam LaPorta. Right now, the Lions are in an interesting position. They hold picks 17 and 50 in the first 2 rounds, but they don't have a 3rd round pick. That gap matters more than people realize, because if they want to target a specific player projected for day 2, they either have to reach at pick 50 or get aggressive and move around the board. And that's where things start to connect with what we've seen from Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell in the past. This regime has already shown a clear tendency. When they identify a replacement, they don't hesitate to move on from a current player, even a productive one. You saw it with DeAndre Swift. You saw it with TJ Hawkinson. In both cases, the Lions made a move that at the time felt surprising, but when you look back, the signs were already there. Draft the replacement, control the contract situation, and maximize value before a big payday hits. Now bring that same lens to LaPorta. He's entering a contract year, and not just any contract year. One where he's projected to command top-tier money at his position. We're talking about potentially becoming one of the highest paid tight ends in the league. That's not a small decision for a front office that has been very calculated with cap management. And then there's the injury factor. A back injury is not something minor, and while we don't know the full severity or recovery timeline, it introduces uncertainty. Not just for the Lions, but for any team that might consider trading for him. The question becomes, do you commit massive money to a player with that kind of risk, or do you pivot while you still control the situation? Now here's where things get even more interesting. There's been reported significant interest from the Lions in a tight end prospect out of Utah, a player with a completely different physical profile compared to LaPorta. Bigger frame, more size, and coming off a breakout season that put him firmly on the radar as a potential day 2 pick. And if you connect that to the Lions' current draft capital, there's really only one place that move makes sense: round 2. But think about that for a second. If you're using your only premium day 2 pick on a tight end, what does that say about your confidence in your current starter? Or more importantly, what does it say about your future plans? Because we've seen this movie before. Draft the replacement, then make the move. That's exactly how this front office has operated. And if they truly believe this prospect can step in and produce on a rookie contract for the next 4 years, that gives them flexibility, financially and structurally. At the same time, the Lions offense has leaned heavily on 13 personnel packages, running 3 tight ends on the field at a high rate. That's part of why fans push back on the idea of trading LaPorta. It makes sense schematically to have depth at the position, but does it make sense financially to invest top-tier money in one tight end while also spending a high draft pick on another? That's the real question. Because if the Lions draft a tight end early, especially in the 2nd round, it's not just about depth, it's about direction. It's about preparing for a decision that might already be closer than people think. And when you factor in everything, the contract timeline, the injury uncertainty, the historical pattern of this regime, and now the reported interest in another tight end, you start to see a scenario where trading LaPorta during the draft isn't just possible. It might actually be part of the plan. So now it comes down to this. If the Lions do take a tight end early, are you looking at a smart long-term move? Or a risky decision that could backfire if LaPorta returns to full form? Because once you start looking at this from the long-term perspective, the decision becomes less emotional and a lot more strategic. This front office has never been about holding on to players just because they're fan favorites. They've consistently shown that timing matters more than sentiment, and if they believe the peak value of Sam LaPorta is right now, then that's exactly when they would consider making a move. And here's the part that really changes how you should look at this situation. If the Detroit Lions wait and let LaPorta play out his contract, they lose control. At that point, you're either paying him top of the market money, using the franchise tag, or letting him walk and hoping for a compensatory pick down the line. That's a reactive position. That's not how Brad Holmes has built this roster. Holmes has been proactive. He's been ahead of the curve. And if you go back to previous moves, the Lions didn't wait until the last possible moment. They acted when they still had leverage. That's exactly why the comparisons to past situations aren't random. They're part of a pattern that keeps showing up. Now add another layer to this. this, the financial reality of what's coming. Extensions are not just about one player. You're looking at future deals for key pieces across the roster, and eventually decisions stack on top of each other. If LaPorta is going to command elite tight end money, and you already know other contracts are on the horizon, then something has to give, and that's where the rookie contract becomes so valuable. If the Lions draft a tight end early, they immediately reset the financial clock at that position. 4 years of cost control, flexibility to allocate money elsewhere, and the ability to maintain roster depth without sacrificing cap space. That's how sustained contenders operate, not by paying everyone, but by choosing who to pay and when to move on. But here's the risk, and this is where fans are completely justified in being divided. LaPorta isn't just any player. He's already proven he can produce at a high level. His rookie season showed flashes of being one of the top tight ends in the league. That kind of production is not easy to replace, no matter how talented a prospect might be. So if you move on from him, you're betting on projection over proven performance. You're betting that the system, the coaching, and the next player can replicate or at least approximate what you're losing. That's not a guaranteed outcome. At the same time, the Lions' offensive identity isn't built around just one player. It's built around versatility, physicality, and depth, multiple tight end sets, a strong run game, and spreading responsibilities across different weapons. In that kind of system, replacing one piece might not be as damaging as it would be on a more star-dependent offense. And don't forget, this isn't happening in isolation. Every draft pick sends a message. If the Lions use that second-round pick on a tight end, it's not just about adding talent, it's a signal to the rest of the league. It tells teams that LaPorta could be available, and the moment that perception exists, the phone starts ringing. All it takes is one team to believe he's worth it, one team to look at his production, trust the medicals, and decide he's their guy. And if that offer lines up with what the Lions are trying to do, then suddenly a move that felt unlikely becomes very real. So now you're looking at a scenario where draft night could completely reshape this position group. Not because the Lions are desperate, but because they're calculated. Because they're thinking 2, 3, even 4 years ahead instead of just the upcoming season. And if that happens, it won't be a random decision. It will be consistent with everything this regime has shown us so far. The real question is whether you trust that process enough to accept a move like this if it happens. Because if the Lions pull the trigger, it's going to come down to belief. Belief in the front office, belief in the system, and belief that the next move is already being set up before this one is even finalized. So if draft night unfolds and the Lions go in that direction, are you ready to trust that vision, or do you think moving on from LaPorta would be a mistake? Because if you really take a step back and look at everything together, this isn't just about replacing Sam LaPorta or making a bold draft move. It's about how the Detroit Lions are trying to sustain success without putting themselves in a position where they have to reset in 2 or 3 years. That's the part a lot of people overlook. It's easy to focus on the now, LaPorta's production, his connection within the offense, and what he's already shown on the field, but front offices don't operate that way. They operate based on timelines, contracts, and windows. And right now, the Lions are approaching a point where multiple key decisions are going to collide at the same time. You're not just thinking about one extension, you're thinking about stacking extensions. You're thinking about how one deal impacts the next. And eventually, you reach a point where keeping everyone simply isn't realistic. That's where discipline comes in. And if there's one thing this regime under Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell has shown, it's discipline. They've stuck to their evaluations, they've trusted their board, and they haven't been afraid to make moves that at first glance don't sit well with everyone. But here's something else that adds another layer to this entire situation. The timing of when decisions are made doesn't always match when fans expect them. Moves like this don't happen when it's obvious. They happen right before it becomes obvious. If the Lions truly believe that LaPorta's value is at its peak, then waiting could actually hurt them. Because once that contract conversation becomes public, once teams know you're either going to pay him or risk losing him, your leverage starts to shrink. And that's why draft night becomes such a critical moment. It's the one time where value, opportunity, and leverage all intersect. You have teams actively looking to fill needs. You have fresh prospects entering the league, and you have flexibility with picks. If there's ever a moment to make a move like this, it's right there. Now imagine this scenario playing out in real time. The Lions are on the clock in the second round. A tight end they've shown strong interest in is still available. The board falls exactly how they hoped. And at the same time, calls are coming in about LaPorta. That's not coincidence. That's preparation. And if they make that pick, everything shifts instantly. The conversation changes from could this happen to this might already be happening. But here's where things get even more interesting. This decision isn't just about offense. It indirectly impacts how the rest of the draft unfolds. Because if you commit that second round pick to a tight end, you're passing on other needs. Edge rusher, offensive line depth, positions that many would argue are more urgent. So if the Lions go in that direction, it tells you something very specific. They believe the value at tight end outweighs those other needs at that point in the draft. That's a strong statement about how they see their roster, and that's why this situation is so fascinating. It's not just one decision, it's a chain reaction. Draft a tight end early and you open the door to trading LaPorta. Trade LaPorta and you gain additional capital. Gain that capital and you can address other positions later. Every move connects to the next. But none of it works if the evaluation is wrong. That's the risk. That's always the risk. Because if the new player doesn't develop the way you expect and LaPorta goes on to thrive somewhere else, then suddenly the narrative flips. What looked like a calculated move becomes a costly mistake. And in a league where margins are thin, those decisions can define not just a season, but an entire era. So as this all continues to build toward draft night, just remember this: what the Lions do at tight end could quietly become one of the most important storylines of their entire offseason. And if that moment comes, if that pick is made, if that trade is announced, you'll know it wasn't sudden. It was planned all along. So now I'll leave you with this. If the Lions had to choose between paying LaPorta and resetting the position with a rookie contract, which direction would you go and why? And the more you think about it, the more you realize this isn't just a single decision point. It's a reflection of how the Detroit Lions view their entire roster structure moving forward. Because what happens at tight end could quietly set the tone for how they handle every other premium position on this team. If they move on from Sam LaPorta before handing out a massive extension, that sends a very clear message. No position group is immune to being reset if the value lines up. Not even one that's been productive, not even one that's been central to the offense. And that kind of mindset can either keep a team competitive for years or create moments where you let go of players who still have elite production ahead of them. That's the balance. Now think about how rare it is to find a tight end who can produce at a high level early in his career. It's not common. Development at that position usually takes time. That's why LaPorta's impact stood out so quickly. He didn't just fit into the offense. He became a reliable piece almost immediately. So if you're even considering moving on from that, you have to be extremely confident in what comes next. And that's where the evaluation of this incoming draft class becomes critical. If the Lions truly believe that the tight end they're targeting can step in and give them similar production, maybe not right away, but within a short window, then the move starts to make more sense from a long-term standpoint. But there's another layer that hasn't been talked about enough: identity. This team under Dan Campbell has built an identity around toughness, versatility, and physical football. Tight ends are a big part of that. Not just as receivers, but as blockers, tone setters, and players who allow the offense to stay unpredictable. So when you evaluate a potential replacement, you're not just asking if he can catch passes. You're asking if he can handle the full responsibility of that role. Can he block at a high level? Can he line